बच्चे हो गए join? Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to your biology lecture. Today we are going to begin with cell structure. Like our first chapter is cell structure. But before we start with the chapter, I just want to brief you about the papers of biology, right? So in A levels, biology, you basically have 5 papers. Paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, paper 4, and paper 5. Paper 4 and paper 5 you'll be taking in A2. So we'll not be talking about them right now. We will be talking about paper 1, paper 2, and paper 3 initially. So to begin with paper 1 comprises of MCQs. Just like you had in O3 you used to do paper 1, right? Similarly, the paper 1 in A levels, in AS, comprises of 40 MCQs. And it's a 40 marks paper. And the time that is allotted to you is 1 hour, 15 minutes. Right? So you have 1 hour, 15 minutes to solve paper 1, that is 40 MCQ. Right? No choice at all. Then moving on to paper 2. Paper 2 is basically your theory paper, right? And it comprises of structured questions. Like in O3, you used to have 3 sections, section 1, section 2, section 3, right? The first section, that was called section A, where you had no choice. You had to attempt all the questions. The structured questions, that's what your paper 2 comprises of. It has 60 marks, right? Paper 3 is new for you. Paper 3 is basically your practical paper. In O3, you used to have alternative to practical paper. You did not used to perform practicals, but now in A levels, you'll be performing practicals, you will be going to the lab regularly, and you will be studying paper 3. It also comprises of 40 marks, and we will talk about it when we'll get there. So for now, paper 1 and paper 2, the difference from O3 is primarily in paper 2, there is no choice. You have to attempt all the questions, right? In paper 1, it is basically advanced level now. So the difficulty level has increased. The MCQs are not as simple as you previously found them. Also, the MCQs, the options that are given in the MCQs, those options are very closely related. It's not always that there is a wrong MCQ, there's a wrong answer and there is a right answer, right? There are options that are very closely related and you have to select the one that's the correct one, right? So it is comparatively a bit confusing, but yes, we will be practicing a lot, inshallah, and we'll get there. So, beginning with our today's topic, that is cell structure. I'm sure the topic sounds a bit familiar because in O3 also the first chapter was about the cell structure. Because the cell is the basis of life. And in biology, as you all know, that biology is the term that we used for life sciences, right? So because we study about life in biology, therefore we have to begin with the study of cell. We will be studying whatever you studied in O3 again, and there will be a few advanced level topics, right, that I'll be touching today, a little bit of them. So what is a cell? You all must be knowing what a cell is, what a cell looks like, right? You must have seen several diagrams in your books, right? So a cell is the basic building block of life that we all know. But did we always know that what is a cell, or did we actually gradually got there? So yes, there were a lot of steps that were involved in getting to the point where we are today, in getting to know what a cell looks like. So there were several people who made up or who comprised this whole theory about the cell. But the person who's most prominent in talking about the cell, the scientist's name is Robert Hooke. So it was the year 1665, and the scientist's name was Robert Hooke. And what he was doing, he was studying the dead part of a plant that's called a cork. The cork that we use to bottle up bottles, right? That cork he was studying, and he was looking at the cork under his self-made microscope. So what he saw in that cork was an image something like this. There were boxes. Huge empty boxes. At that point in his given language, he called these boxes as cellulae. So the first word that was given to the today's cell was cellulae, which gradually changed into cell that we now call, right? At his point, because the microscope was not very well developed, so we saw empty boxes, and he called those empty boxes cells. So the statement that he gave was that plants are made up of empty cell-like structures, which he called cellulae, right? This is far from the definition of cell that we have today, right? We know that cell is made up of a huge number of organelles, right? So how did we get there? After this discovery, for about 200 years, there was no further advancement in the topic because we lacked proper microscopes. There were not proper microscopes, so it paused here. After about 200 years, I'm not erasing his name, after about 200 years, in the year 1883, after a gap of roughly about 200 years, in the year 1883, a theory was published. And that theory is the basis of biology. That theory is termed as the cell theory. Now you need to learn this. There are a few points of the cell theory that I'll be writing down for you. You write them down in your notebooks as well. So the first point of the cell theory was what we all know, that all living things, whether they are plants or animals, are made up of cells. There is a modern terminology for it, that cell is, this can also be used, cell is the basic unit of life. So this was the first part of cell theory. All right, so cell theory was not actually made by two people, but because two people compiled it, therefore the credit goes to them, right? So the two people who compiled cell theory are Sheldon and Schwann. They're the ones who compiled the cell theory, right? They're the ones who actually brought a lot of points that the scientists have been working on for 200 years, and they made up what? The cell theory. The first postulate of the cell theory states that all living things, whether they're plants or they're animals, they're made up of what? Cells. Or you can simplify it by saying that cell is the basic unit of life, right? Sheldon was a botanist, whereas Schwann was a zoologist. So what they both did was, Sheldon studied almost all of the plant tissues under a microscope. Schwann studied several animal tissues under the microscope. And that's when they came to the conclusion that there are differences that are present, but despite those differences, all life form is basically made up of cell, right? The second point that we have is that, number 2, new cells arise from pre-existing cells, right? How are new cells made? New cells arise from pre-existing cells. What does this statement mean? I'll also write in the bracket the name of the person who actually worked on it. It was Virchow who actually worked on it. What he was doing was, he was studying a drop of water under the microscope. And what he saw an organism dividing from one cell into two cells. Just like this, something like this. From here, he concluded that new cells cannot be made. New cells, they actually arise from cells that already exist. Now, how did the first cell came into being? That is another debate for another day, right? So the second part of the cell theory states that new cells come into being, or new cells arise from cells that already exist, right? And you can easily call it cell division. This point refers to what? The theory of cell divisions, that cells are able to divide and they're able to replicate, they're able to increase their number. You can refer to it in this form as well. So two basic parts of cell theory we have discussed till now. The first part being that all life form, whatever life form it is, whether it's plants, whether it's animals, it's made up of what? Cells. Like cell is the basic unit of life, cell is the building block of life. Then new cells arise from pre-existing cells. Then there was a third part of it. Initially, we had seen only multicellular organisms. We had not seen unicellular organisms, right? But then when we discovered organisms in microscope, when Virchow saw organisms dividing, he gave a third postulate, and the third postulate stated that the smallest unit in which life is possible is a cell, right? Like cells do not necessarily need to come together and form tissues. Cells can exist as individual entities as well. So the smallest unit in which life is possible, that is what a cell. So these are basically three postulates, three popular postulates of cell theory. On the internet, you'll find different statements, but more or less, they'll all agree on these 3 points. That the first point being that all living things are made up of what? Cells. New cells come into being from pre-existing cells, and this postulate was not actually given by these two people. This was actually discovered by the scientist named Virchow, but this became a part of cell theory because they published it when they gave their cell theory, right? And the last point being the smallest unit in which life is possible, that is what? A cell, right? Then, moving on from this, now, there are many parts of cell that we will be looking at today. But there's one thing that you all need to have very clear in your head, which is the most vital part of a cell. A part of the cell, or you can say which is the most important part of a cell. Now, the part of the cell without which a cell will not be a cell, or you will not have a cell, that is the plasma membrane. We have cells that do not have a nucleus. We have cells that do not have a mitochondria. We have cells that do not have, that entirely lose all their organelles. But we do not have any cell that does not have a plasma membrane. Plasma membrane, as you all might remember, I'll give you a quick review. Plasma membrane, also commonly known as the cell membrane, is a selectively permeable membrane surrounding the cells. Membrane that surrounds the cell. So if we'll not have the plasma membrane, that means the cytoplasm would be lying in the environment, right? There would be nothing separating the cell from the outer environment. So the vital organelle, the most important part that actually separates the inner or part of the cell from the outer environment, that is the plasma membrane. That means no plasma membrane means no cell, right? So this is the most important or the most vital part of the cell, and we will be studying it in detail in chapter number 4, what it is made up of, how this works and how this controls the cell, right? Okay. As you all already might know, that we have two types of microscopes, right? There is a light microscope and there is what? An electron microscope. There are several other types, but two basic types that we will be discussing. Why I'm bringing microscopes into this is, you know that cell is not visible with the naked eye, right? To study the cell, we need to see it under a microscope, right? So when you look at the cell under a light microscope, you see only a generalized image. You do not see the organelles in detail, right? So whenever you will find the term structure of the cell, that means the cell is being viewed under the light microscope. When we use the term ultrastructure of the cell, that means the cell is being viewed under the electron microscope. So we will be studying both the general structure of the cell that you've already studied in O3, maybe some points of it maybe, and then we will be studying the ultrastructure of the cell as well. That is how it is viewed under the electron microscope. I'm repeating this part again. There are several kinds of microscopes, but there are two basic kinds, right? Light microscope that uses the light to look at the image, right? And the electron microscope that uses electrons, a beam of electrons to elaborate the image, right? So light microscope, as the structure of the cell is seen by the light microscope, you'll find the term what? The general term would be that we're looking at the structure of the cell, right? But wherever in your book or in the paper, you find the term ultrastructure written, that means that that is how it is observed under the electron microscope. So first of all, we'll be looking, or today we'll be looking at the structure of the cell, and inshallah tomorrow we'll begin with the ultrastructure, right? As you all know that there are two basic types of cells, animal cells and plant cells, right? But here I would just differentiate a little. Cells are of two basic types, and those basic types are not animal and plant. First of all, we divide them into two basic types, that is prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cell. So cells have two basic types, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Pro means before, karyon means nucleus, right? Again, these are ancient cells, right? The cells that were first made, when the first cell was made, that was probably a prokaryotic cell. All the prokaryotic organisms have become extinct now, and we're left with only two types of prokaryotes. Only two types of prokaryotic organisms. They are what? Bacteria. All types of bacteria that are found in the world, all the bacteria are what? Prokaryotic organisms. That means they do not have a nucleus. Cells that are without a nucleus. I'll mention it here under it. What are prokaryotic cells? Without nucleus. So bacteria, and the second class is called cyanobacteria. Or you can use the term blue-green algae. Right? So these are the only two living examples of prokaryotes. Rest, all the prokaryotes have vanished from the face of earth. They have become extinct, right? And all the organisms that are not prokaryotic, that are not bacteria, they're all considered as eukaryotes. And we have 4 kingdoms for eukaryotes. Number 1 being the plants. Number 2, animals. Number 3, fungi. And number 4, Protoctista. It's not in your syllabus, so we'll not be discussing them in detail. But the 4 kingdoms that I've mentioned here, these 4 kingdoms are what? Eukaryotic. Matlab, all the organisms apart from bacteria and cyanobacteria, all those organisms are considered as what? Eukaryotic cells. So there are 2 basic types of cells. You have prokaryotic cells and you have what? Eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells being the old cells, the ancient cells, cells without a nucleus, and eukaryotic cells being the modern cells or the cells with a nucleus, right? So bacteria and cyanobacteria are prokaryotic, and rest all the organisms found in the world are what? Eukaryotic organisms. Then eukaryotic cell has 2 types, right? So eukaryotic cell, that is the modern cell that we have, the cell that we will be studying. We will also study the prokaryotic cell as a last topic. So eukaryotic cell then has 2 types. There are either plant cells or they're what? Animal cells. Right? I hope I'm clear. So cells have 2 types, prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, right? And then eukaryotic light microscope. The organelles that are visible under a light microscope, will be touching them, and then we'll be studying each and every organelle in detail later on, right? So how are we going to study the plant and the animal cell? So similarities between animal and plant cell. So we'll begin with the similarities between animal cells and plant cells, right? So I'm going to draw a general depiction of the animal and the plant cell, right? So generally, this is what an animal cell looks like, right? It is all mentioned in your book, but please do note it while I'm writing it on the board. All right, so, and this is generally what a plant cell looks like. So first of all, I'm going to be drawing the similarities between them. So the first basic similarity, the first similarity that is also a similarity between a eukaryotic and a prokaryotic cell, that is the presence of the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane is present in both animal and plant cell. Animal cell and plant cell, so this is an animal cell and this is a plant cell. So we'll be studying their similarities and differences, beginning with the similarities, that the outermost membrane in the case of the animal cell and the plant cell, sorry, in the case of animal cell, the outermost membrane, and in the case of the plant cell, the second membrane, we'll discuss what is outside it, is a plasma membrane. For now, animal and plant cells, they both have a plasma membrane, or they both have a selectively permeable cell membrane. The first similarity, right? Because this is the part of the cell that makes it a cell. If it will not have a plasma membrane, will not have a cell, right? The second most important similarity is the most important organelle of the cell, and that is the nucleus. Both animal cells and plant cells, they both have a nucleus in them. Although the sizes may vary, although the position may vary, but both animal and plant cell, they'll both have what? A nucleus in them. A prominent, clear, visible nucleus, a nucleus that can be seen with the light microscope. The details cannot be seen, but the nucleus can be seen, right? Okay. The nucleus contains, as you all might already know, that what does the nucleus contain? The nucleus contains DNA. And what is DNA? Deoxyribonucleic acid, which is what? the hereditary material. The material that is passed on from parents to offsprings, the material that carries genes, the material that carries all the information of your body on it, that material is present where? Inside the nucleus. And DNA is present in the form of, I'm writing it here on the side, DNA is present in the form of chromatin, or you can call it what? Chromatin thread, right? So a thread-like structure called chromatin is present, that is made up of what? DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, right? And this chromatin leads to the formation of what? Chromosomes. So chromosomes and chromatin is basically the same thing, just different levels of coiling, right? Less coiled, it forms chromatin. More coiled, it forms what? Chromosomes, right? So the first similarity is the plasma membrane. Second similarity is what? The nucleus. And plasma membrane is the outermost membrane in the case of animal cell. In the plant cells, it is the second membrane, right? And then there is a nucleus present inside, in the middle in the case of the animal cell, on one side in the case of the plant cells. So, and what does the nucleus contain? It contains DNA. DNA makes up what? Chromatin. And chromatin makes up what? Chromosomes, right? There is one more thing that's present inside the nucleus. Nucleus not only contains the chromatin and the DNA, blah, blah, blah. It also contains a darker region, a very dark region, and that is termed as nucleolus. This nucleolus is also found both in animal and plant cells. So this is termed as nucleolus, right? What is nucleolus? What does it do? We will study it. For now, just remember that it somehow connects with the formation of proteins, right? Protein synthesis. Somehow it helps in protein synthesis. How it does that, why it does that, how often it does that, that we'll be studying later. But nucleolus is somehow linked to the formation of proteins inside the cell. And I want you to remember this, right? Because there is going to be a link in between this and the ultrastructure then, right? Okay. Also, the number of nucleoli may vary. Nucleolus can be 1, it can be 2. The number may vary from 2 to 5 in the case of the mammalian cell, right? So basically we've discussed only 2 points till now, that there is what? A plasma membrane in both the cells, and there is what? A nucleus in both the cells that is present. What else is there that is common in both the cells? Both the cells have mitochondria. This is what they look like. Both the cells, they contain mitochondria. Animal cells and plant cells, they both have mitochondria. And as you might remember from O3, what is the function of these mitochondria? They are the powerhouse of the cell. What do we mean by powerhouse of the cell? They release energy that is trapped in the food. The energy trapped in the food is released by what? Mitochondria into the cytoplasm in the form of ATP. We will be discussing this in detail later on. Another common thing is the cytoplasm. The area between the cell membrane and the nucleus, this entire space here and this entire space here is not empty. This entire space is filled by a jelly-like fluid that contains everything that's present in a cell, and this jelly-like fluid is called cytoplasm. So another common thing between the plant and the animal cell is the presence of cytoplasm. The area is also exact. The area between the cell membrane and the nucleus is occupied by what? A cytoplasm. All the organelles present in the cell are suspended in this cytoplasm. Another common thing between both of them is not an organelle. That is a function, a process. And the process is termed as compartmentalization. All of you must have been to departmental stores, right? Like Al Fateh we have here in Sialkot. they have areas where they place different products, right? There is an area where you would find all the kitchen stuff. Then there is an area where you will find all the stuff related to maybe the vegetables and everything, right? It's easier for you to work that way, right? Similarly, the cell has divided its functions. There is a specific area that respires, a specific area that replicates, a specific area that does photosynthesis. So all the functions can be done all at once, right? This phenomena of separating functions, dividing functions in different units is termed as what? Compartmentalization. The reason the eukaryotic cells have become so widely existed on the surface of the earth and the reason prokaryotes were wiped off was this compartmentalization. Because in the case of the prokaryotic cell, every single function was performed in the cytoplasm. Respiration in the cytoplasm, photosynthesis in the cytoplasm, right? Cell had to wait for one process to be over to start the second process. What the eukaryotic cell did, the reason for the success of the eukaryotic cell is its compartmentalization, division of labor. It has divided its functions. It has divided the roles between organelles, right? What are basically organelles? This mitochondria is an organelle. Like our body has organs, the heart, the lungs, etc., right? Similarly, cells have organelles that have division of labor. They have divided their functions. So all the functions can be performed all at once simultaneously and the cell can survive, right? That's all for today. We'll be studying the differences of plant and animal cell tomorrow. And I hope that you will be reading this topic from your book. It's the first chapter and the first few pages, first 2 to 3 pages. So please do go through them before we begin our lecture tomorrow, inshallah. All right. Allah Hafiz. Thank you. लगे रहने दो